Have you ever felt like you have to pick a lane? Like early on, there's this pressure. You're either the math person or you're the art person.
The left brain versus the right brain.
Exactly. And the world kind of tells you that you can't really be both. That, engineering is cold and precise, and art is messy and human.
And that those two worlds they don't talk to each other.
Right. And looking around today, it sometimes feels like the cold and precise side is winning. Technology is getting so complex, so algorithmic, and I don't know, a little soulless sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But today we are diving into a story that just completely rejects that choice. We're looking at what happens when you refuse to pick a lane.
We are. And this isn't just, a biography we're walking through. It's really a study on the fusion of poetry and processors.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at how merging a deep sense of humanity with high-end engineering revolutionized, well, not one, but 6 different industries.
We are, of course, talking about the logic, the life, and the legacy of Steve Jobs. But we're looking at it through a really specific lens. If you look at the first idea in our guide today, it just sets the stage perfectly. It's like a signpost.
Right. It's an image that Jobs himself used to define his whole philosophy. You have a sign, and on one side, it points to liberal arts. On the other, technology.
And he's standing right there at the intersection.
Exactly. Not in the lab, not in the studio, but right there in the middle.
Which is such a powerful image because most people, they hang out at one end of the street or the other. He built his house in the middle of the intersection.
He did, and that's the mission of this deep dive. We want to understand how he did that because, and this is so important, Jobs wasn't the world's best coder. He wasn't the best electrical engineer. His genius was seeing that technology alone isn't enough.
It has to be married with the humanities, too, as he put it.
Make our hearts sing.
I love that phrase.
Huh.
So let's unpack the origin story here, because you don't just wake up one day with a philosophy like that. It starts early.
It does. If we look at the foundations of his life, the guide highlights these 2 huge competing influences. We call them the workbench and the wound.
Okay, let's start with the workbench. This is his father, Paul Jobs.
Right. Paul Jobs was a mechanic, a real salt-of-the-earth craftsman. And there's this one specific memory Steve had that basically became the cornerstone of Apple's design philosophy.
The fence.
The fence. Some people say a cabinet, but yeah. They're building a fence in the backyard.
Okay.
And his dad stops him and says they have to make the back of the fence look just as good as the front.
Which, if you're a kid, that makes absolutely no sense. Nobody sees the back of the fence.
Exactly. Why waste the time? But his father said, "You will know." And that was a lesson in what we call deep simplicity. It's the integrity of the craft. A true craftsman cares about the hidden parts.
Just as much as the visible ones.
Not for the market, but for the sake of the thing itself.
That is... Wow. It explains so much, though. I mean, if you've ever seen the inside of a Mac from that era, it's gorgeous. And you're not even supposed to open it.
Not at all. He carried that back of the fence idea his whole life. But then you have to contrast that wholesome, disciplined craftsmanship with, well, the other side of his foundation. The darker side. The wound.
The psychological piece. Jobs was adopted at birth.
Yes. And while he loved his adoptive parents, Paul and Clara, very deeply, that knowledge that he was given up by his biological parents, it created this primal wound.
There's that quote from Chris N. Brennan, his first serious girlfriend.
It really cuts to the bone. She said, "He who is abandoned is an abandoner."
Ooh, that's heavy.
It is. But if you look at it analytically, this feeling of abandonment fueled this.
Yeah.
This desperate need for complete control. If you control your environment, every single part of it, you can't be surprised. You can't be hurt.
And the notes here point out this made him see himself as independent and special. Like, because he was an exception to the normal rule of parenting, he was an exception to all the rules.
Precisely. So you get this collision, right? The discipline of a craftsman who cares about the back of the fence and the psychological intensity of a man who needs to control his entire universe.
Right.
That is a potent mix.
So you take that personality, the craftsman and the controller, and you drop him into Northern California in the 1970s. This is where things get really fun. We're looking at this Venn diagram of the counterculture and the was.
Yeah, you really have to understand the 70s Bay Area. Circle one is the counterculture. You've got Zen Buddhism, LSD, minimalism, the whole Earth catalog.
Yeah.
It's all about expanding human consciousness.
And then circle two is the hacker, the homebrew computer club.
The smell of solder, yeah. And of course, the other Steve Wozniak.
Was the wizard.
The engineer's engineer. But here's the crucial distinction. And the intersection point on this diagram is The blue box.
A blue box, a little gadget they built to hack the phone system for free long-distance calls,
Yeah,
right?
look at the dynamic. Wozniak designed it. And what did Woz want to do?
Give it away for free.
Give the schematics away. He just wanted to show off this incredible engineering feat.
Classic hacker ethos. Information wants to be free.
But Jobs,
Yeah.
Jobs saw the blue box and said, we can package this, we can sell this. He saw the commercial potential.
So the big takeaway here is that Jobs wasn't the hardware guy. His genius was packaging Woz's genius.
He was the bridge.
Yeah.
The bridge between the soldering iron and the consumer. He translated the technology.
But to get people to do the impossible things he wanted, he developed this almost supernatural management style. The guide calls it the reality distortion field.
A term coined by Bud Tribble, one of the early Mac designers. It's Jobs' ability to literally bend the truth through sheer force of will.
I've always been fascinated and kind of terrified by this. Basically, if you told him something was impossible.
He would just stare at you without blinking and say, it is possible. And he would believe it so intensely that you would start to believe it too. He just refused to accept limitations.
The ripple effect of that. I mean, it drove teams to burnout for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it also drove them to brilliance.
Hmm?
They did things they physically did not think they could do.
But it had a very sharp edge. The guide details his binary classification of people.
His sorting mechanism.
At the two buckets, you were either insanely great, of God, an A player,
Or you were shit. A bozo. A B player.
and there was no middle ground. You're either Einstein or you're a bozo.
No middle ground at all. And while that sounds incredibly harsh, and it was, it created a culture where people were terrified of being the bozo. It filtered out mediocrity, but at a huge human cost.
So he's got the vision, he's got the distortion field, and now it's 1984. He applies all this to the first major launch, the Macintosh.
This is the war on the command line interface. And you have to remember, before 1984, computers were hostile. Green screens, blinking cursors.
You had to speak the machine's language, typing in these cryptic codes.
Exactly. And Jobs wanted a computer to be an appliance. He wanted to be a toaster for the mind. You don't program a toaster, you just use it.
The guy mentions he was influenced by the Eichler homes he grew up around.
All right, those California modernist houses. They were smart, cheap, and brilliantly designed for the masses. He wanted the Mac to be the Eichler home of computers.
And the big technical shift was moving from that command line to the graphical user interface.
WISIYG, what you see is what you get. A bitmapped screen. This allowed for beautiful fonts, for art, for overlapping windows. It made the computer friendly.
But, and here's the control freak again, he kept it a closed system.
Yes. Unlike those early hobbyist computers, you couldn't open the Mac. You couldn't add parts. He wanted to curate the entire experience from the second you open the box.
And there's that famous quote of his, real artists ship. It had to get out the door.
But that intensity, it eventually caught up with him. Which moves us to the chapter called Icarus, the Fall.
The higher you fly.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with the courtship of John Scully from Pepsi.
Which gave us the most famous recruiting line in business history. Jobs just asks him, do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?
Who says no to that? That's the ultimate reality distortion field move.
Scully didn't. They became the dynamic duo in '84. But by '85, it's the collision.
The boardroom showdown.
Jobs' vision had made him unmanageable. He couldn't compromise. Specifically, he refused to lower the price of the Macintosh even when sales were slowing. He used a scorched earth style against his own board.
So they fired him, the founder, exiled from his own company.
And here's the interesting insight from the material. Being fired was necessary medicine. He was brilliant, but he wasn't mature. He needed to fail.
So let's look at that next phase, the wilderness years. He's away from Apple, starts two companies. First up, NextT.
Represented by that iconic black cube, NextT was a technological masterpiece, incredibly advanced, but commercially a total failure. Too expensive for the education market it was for.
And he indulged his worst instincts there, right?
Yeah.
The perfectionism was out of control.
Completely. He was worrying about the paint on the inside of the machines again.
Mm-hmm.
But the legacy of NextT is that its operating system, its software brain, eventually became the heart of Mac OS X. So the tech survived.
And then the other company, the one with the hopping lamb, Pixar.
This is so crucial. Pixar is the true intersection of art and tech. Jobs buys this computer division from Lucasfilm, and he watches them create Toy Story.
And what did he learn there? I mean, he wasn't an animator, he wasn't directing.
He learned that Storytelling is king,
Hmm.
and he learned deference. He had to trust John Lasseter and the creative team because he didn't know how to make a movie. It humbled him, and it taught him how to merge the computer and content industries.
So he's got a new OS from NXT and a new respect for storytelling from Pixar. It's 1997, Apple is dying, and we get the return.
And the context is dire. Apple was 90 days from insolvency, 90 days from just disappearing.
So what does he do? Most CEOs would launch 10 new things to see what sticks.
He does the complete opposite. He slashes 70% of the roadmap. He looks at all these printers and different models and just says, stop.
And he draws that simple box, the 2x2 matrix, the quadrant.
It's brilliant in its simplicity. Two axes. One is consumer versus pro. The other is desktop versus portable. 4 squares.
And that's it. Just fill the 4 squares.
That's it. One product for each. The iMac, the Power Mac, the iBook, and the PowerBook. His philosophy was deciding what not to do is as important as deciding what to do. Focus is about saying no.
And in that consumer desktop square, we get the iMac, which leads us to the design philosophy.
This is the era of his partnership with Joni Ive. They believed design wasn't just a veneer how it looked, but how it worked. It was the fundamental soul of the thing.
They use that term deep simplicity again. It's not just minimalism, it's the conquering of complexity.
And the best example is the handle on the original iMac.
I always loved that handle, but it's a desktop. You're not supposed to carry it around. Why put a handle on a 40-pound machine?
It's a semiotic signal. It's a sign. By putting a handle on it, the machine signals to you, I am friendly. You can touch me. I'm not a scary piece of technology. It gave you permission.
That is so subtle, but so smart. It's psychology again.
Always.
Okay, so the Mac is back. The company is saved. But he isn't done. He sees a bigger picture. The digital hub strategy.
This is the shift. The computer is no longer a standalone unit. It's the center of your lifestyle, the hub.
So your digital camera, your DVD player, your organizer, they all plug into the Mac.
And then the loop. The iPod ecosystem. This is where Apple just pulled away from everyone else.
Because it wasn't just a music player. There were tons of MP3 players before the iPod.
But they were clumsy. The iPod was different because of the hardware, the iPod itself, plus the software, iTunes, plus the content store. This end-to-end control created a seamless experience.
Right. I remember trying to use other MP3 players. You're dragging and dropping files, worrying about formats. It was a mess.
Competitors were fragmented. Apple integrated it.
Yeah.
And the result? By 2005, 20 million iPods sold.
Which brings us to arguably the biggest gamble in business history, the leapfrog, the iPhone.
Jobs realized something scary. To survive, Apple had to cannibalize its own successful iPod business. He knew phones would start playing music, and that would kill the iPod.
So instead of waiting for someone else to kill it, he decided to kill it himself.
Exactly. The equation was iPod plus phone plus internet communicator.
3 products in one. And the huge innovation was removing the keyboard. Remember BlackBerries with those little plastic keys?
Jobs hated them. He famously said, God gave us 10 styluses, meaning our fingers. He hated the plastic stylus.
So they created the multi-touch interface.
And that was the breakthrough. It allowed the screen to morph. If you need a keyboard, it appears. If you're watching a video, it disappears.
Right.
It was fluid. It adapted.
And that fluidity naturally leads to the next step, the post-PC era, iPad.
This is the ultimate expression of that appliance vision from '84. It's just a piece of glass.
It becomes whatever the software wants it to be. A book, a TV.
And notice the shift here. The computer is no longer the hub. The cloud is the hub. The iPad syncs to the web.
People mocked it at first. They called it a big iPhone. But it sold 15 million units in 9 months.
It redefined what a computer could be. It made technology intimate.
So we've covered the products, but the guide argues that Jobs' greatest creation wasn't a device at all. It was the DNA of Apple.
Yes. He knew he wouldn't live forever, so he had to institutionalize his perfectionism. He built a 4-pillar helix into the company culture.
Let's run through those 4 pillars.
First, secrecy. Create surprise and delight. No leaks. Second, integration. The whole widget. Hardware and software made together. Third, 8 players. We talked about this. Preventing the bozo explosion. And finally, responsibility. We sign our work.
We sign our work. That goes right back to the fence, doesn't it?
It really does. Even if it's inside the case where no one sees it, you sign it because you know it's there.
So if we zoom out and look at the final summary, the brightest heaven of invention, the total impact is just staggering. 6 industries revolutionized.
Let's just list them. because the scope is wild. 1, personal computers with the Apple II and Mac. 2, animated movies with Pixar. 3, music with the iPod and iTunes. 4, phones with the iPhone. 5, tablet computing and the iPad. And 6, digital publishing with the App Store.
And the common thread through all of it.
The source of the genius wasn't processing power. It was intuition. He proved that the best technology is the kind that becomes invisible. It just gets out of the way so the human can create.
It's amazing. One person standing at that intersection refusing to choose could change how we all live.
It all connects back to that first image, the intersection. The magic didn't come from the chip. It came from the humanity infused into the chip.
That is a perfect place to wrap this up. But we want to leave you with one final thought. Jobs famously said, "I want to put a ding in the universe."
And that raises the question for you listening right now. In your own work, are you focusing only on the processor, or are you remembering the poetry?
Are you building the back of the fence?
That's the question.
Thanks for diving in with us today.
See you next time.